Okay, so we'll start with an introduction, which will then lead to an interactive presentation. It's interactive. So please, I'll need some feedback from you. We'll be talking about, first of all, paradigm shift. I'll bring up a number of points which will get you to start thinking more about certain things you may have thought you got all sorted out before. We'll talk about safety culture, how the paradigm shift then leads to the way we view safety culture. And we'll have practical examples at the end. And then we'll go through a case study. It will be a personal experience I had whilst flying offshore, which I love the story quite a lot. And finally, a conclusion at the end of the day. It was just pointed out to me that this session was slated for 2 hours. It ain't 2 hours, okay? Yeah, it's a standard 1.5 hours, so don't panic there. Right. Quite often, when you go for summits or classes or whatever, you tend to get these 7 or 10 or whatever they are, number of points that tends to instruct you on what to do. So you see certain things like, 7 ways of revealing hidden truth, or 5 reasons why you should sniff pink flowers. We're not doing that today, okay? What I'm here to do is to get you to consider and to think in your own way. And why would I do that? Well, I have a background that's probably different from the vast majority of you, right? I cannot bring what I understand and what I know and instruct you in your own world. Cannot do that. But what I can do is this session to talk about the principles which are the root of the tree itself. The principles will then lead on to instructions. You deal with the instructions yourself. You deal with how to make things work yourselves. My job is to give you a good understanding of what the principles are, okay? I'll be talking about the hows, which will then lead to the different whats. That will be your job. And one of them, of course, is 5 reasons why I should sniff pink flowers. Now, why did I put that there? I don't know. It's just a thought. Right. Safety is neither a goal nor a priority. Now, I would imagine initially you would have thought, what's he talking about? What on earth is he talking about? Well, a goal gives you the impression of having a destination, right? And when you get to a destination, what happens? That's the end of the trip. Or a priority also gives the impression of being something more important than others. But safety is not that at all. It is, when you think of safety that way, you're, if I may say, reducing the efficacy of exactly what it is. We've also, you all know what the ALARP means, the as low as reasonably possible. Now the question is, reasonably, who's responsible for that? What's reasonable for you may not be reasonable for me. How do we determine that? Have you guys all, I'm sure you've all heard of that term. How do you determine ALARP in your different organizations? Anyone?
ALARP usually is something which you feel like a level you have been able to reach, which you consider good enough for that specific situation, solution. ALARP usually is better off by having multiple people decide whether or not.
Beautiful. Beautiful, because I was going to get you there. I was going to say what makes your choice of your level better than mine. Yes, you do have a group of people, and everyone goes, well, I think this is mine, and I think that's yours. And we kind of find a consensus there. But even that is very subjective. Now, we'll go back to the foundation and talk about some certain sayings that you may have heard in the past. And the first is, I want to introduce you to the fact that there's certain familiar things that you need to reconsider. Now, that might sound like a bit like an odd thing to say, but yes. And the first of them is, we do not want to reinvent the wheel. I'm sure you've all heard that. Who agrees with that statement? Okay. Now, I'll take you through the evolution of the wheel, right? The wheel started off as a big heavy stone, and wood came in, and then spokes to make it lighter, rubber for more grip, and then stuffing some air to give the ride a better ride, and taking all the metal and take out all the metal rather, and make it lighter. But hey, guess what? It's still the same wheel, and it still carries on with the same problem. The big problem of wheels is friction. So there's a limit to what wheels can do, or where wheels can go. So what do? Do we continue to improve on the wheel, or do we reinvent the wheel? We reinvent the wheel. Now, has that been done? Yes. Magnetic levitation. Do we all know what that means? Okay. Basically, it means, you've got that train that doesn't actually sit on the tracks, but with the opposing magnetic poles suspends the train in the air. And that has done away with the big problem that wheels have, which is friction. So guess what? We have reinvented the wheel. It's not called a wheel anymore. Call it whatever. Call it a white table, right? But the whole idea behind that is there's a difference between wanting to improve and taking a completely different paradigm shift. That's what Henry Ford did. If I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Do we just want to continue to improve, or do we want to take a step back and go, right, has this system outlived its usefulness? Have we squeezed the last drop of goodness out of it? And do we now have to think of something completely and totally different? I don't think there's any horse that runs as fast as the standard car today. So that's what we're about today. Second one is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Have you heard that? Does anyone agree with it? Here we go. Everyone's going to go, no, I'm not going to say anything. Right. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Think of the Roman army. These guys ruled for 500 years, right? They were well-oiled, lean, mean fighting machines. They had very good systems. They had very good this and very good that. But as far as the last time I checked, the Roman army doesn't rule the world anymore today. But what happened? Does anyone have an idea of what happened to the Roman army? Say again? Yeah, but they had a system which was good, and they had a system which worked. And guess what? The major downfall was this. They over-relied on tried and tested methods. Oh, it's always worked. It's always worked well. Why should we change it? Well, guess what? Eventually, your enemy is going to begin to kind of source how your system works. And eventually, your system is going to go out of fashion. So there are times where we have to fix it though it hasn't broke, if I can say that. Because at some point in time in the future, guess what? The world changes all the time. As you'll see as we go further down during the course, the world changes, and you have to change with the world. Otherwise, you get left behind, and you become irrelevant. Another point is that solutions are not always so obvious. Whenever people say things like, oh yeah, obviously, George, that, blah, 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 that kind of gives me the shivers. Obviously, nothing is ever so obvious. Have a look at this picture. You have a look at the left-hand side, 1 and 2. If you were the council chairman of the local, whatever it is, and you're tasked to fix that problem, what would you do?
Put a rail on the other side.
Why? Why would you do that?
We're not down over there yet.
Hey, why not fix it? Why not just patch it up? I love that. That's a very good consideration. Any other ideas? He would put a rail on the other side, but I'm so used to coming around from here and going around up there. Why would I go across and go up the other side? Yeah. The point here is, the first thought would be fix the stairs, right? Fix them. But there's a story of a factory somewhere in the UK where a pretty old factory, and over the years, the stairs had worn out exactly like that. And there were no reported accidents, or there were no accidents, okay? And they had a new CEO who turns up and says, oh, that's dangerous. That's dangerous. Fix it. What do you think happened? Everyone started falling over. And why did that happen? Or why do you think that happened? It was outside the norm. It was outside the norm. The norm was, I mean, it's all about motor functions, right? You step up, when you go up steps, you take the first 2 or 3, and you stop looking down, and then you look up, because then your brain has registered the different heights, okay? Now, when you work in a place like this, like that factory, your brain has registered that, okay, this is higher than that and that. So when you think you're fixing a problem, you could actually be creating a bigger problem. So everything you think may be so obvious may not quite be so obvious. Okay, these are little points that are going to help us as we go through the course. And finally, more doesn't always mean better. My background is in aviation, and I'm very sorry to report, we do that a lot. Someone does something wrong, retrain. That beautiful word. Retrain him or fire him. That is not always the case. If I draw a graph of number of incidents or accidents over the number of regulations, how would you expect the graph to look like? As in, would you expect the accident rates to decrease as you have more rules? That's what people tend to assume, that the more rules I have, the less accidents I have. Yes, sir. Beautiful. Why would he do that? He did that.
Well, because it's an upside down lift over driving, so it's typical in our business.
Yeah.
But the reason is because people start to ignore them, they become unowners, they forget them. I mean, it just becomes overwhelming, so they end up doing their own thing.
And that's the word. It becomes overwhelming. So, of course, you don't want to have no rules at all. Although I say that very loosely, because there are certain instances where no rules actually made the situation safe. But you want to have some rules to create some order, but then it gets to a point where you have to have an optimum level of control. Because if you go beyond that, what was the word used again, sir? It becomes overwhelming. It becomes overwhelming. And that actually begins to reintroduce danger into the system when you operate on that side of the graph. And that's exactly what happened to Swiss Air Flight 111. For those not familiar with it, Swiss Air had a culture of following the rules to the last letter. You will follow the emergency checklist as written, exactly as written. And the flight, it was the MD-11, took off from, I think it was Newark, somewhere near New York or somewhere, on the way back to Switzerland. And when it was offshore Newfoundland, they had a cockpit fire. Now, the Swiss Air cockpit fire procedures, right, is reputed to have taken 35 minutes to complete. The guys did a good job. They followed the checklist, but they all died. But they did follow the checklist. Now, that was a very big smack in the backside for those in the aviation world. That is not just about following the checklist. Because there are times, and I'll say this, there are times you can be legal and yet unsafe. Does anyone dispute that statement I just made? There are times you can be legal and yet unsafe. There are times you have to break the rules. Now, please don't go back saying George Santos says break the rules. No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, say, I don't know, your wife is in labor and the baby's head is half out and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're in a 40-mile-an-hour zone. Don't tell me you're going to drive at 40 miles an hour to the hospital. You won't, So that's exactly what we're talking about. When it comes to number of rules, number of, what your company procedures are, et cetera, there is a maximum amount of control that you can put into the system to maintain safety. There are times you may have to reduce the number of rules you have to make the system safer or rewrite them. Now, safety is never, what exactly is safety? What does it mean? What exactly does it mean? Can you have a look at this onboard card? It's not a real one, okay? But for those, can you all see it at the back? The lettering is pretty small. Can you just read through? Can't read, okay. It says up there, yours to read for £2.50. Yours to read for £2.50. It says, in case of pressure loss, insert £1 into the slot to release oxygen. Secure your own mask, but do not help others. They must pay for it themselves. And it goes on to say stuff like that. If the plane has to land in an emergency, insert your card into the chip and PIN device. When the transaction is complete, exit the aircraft. A member of the crew will be on hand to collect your £25 emergency disembarkation fee. Right. I am the CEO of Bargain Airlines. Would you fly my airline? Would you fly with me? Who says no? Be brave, come on. You say no. Why wouldn't you fly with me, sir? Why would you not fly with me?
Well, you're asking me to pay for systems,
Yeah?
but I don't know if the systems are, the way I think is how well you're upkeeping those systems.
Right, okay. And why would you think so, sir? I think we're a very honest company. And I think we would only get you to pay for what you use. When you fly the other airlines, my competitors, they charge you for use of oxygen, but have you ever used oxygen? No. Have you ever been refunded the cost of your ticket for oxygen? No. You've never used the oxygen, you've never used life jackets and stuff, so I think that's wrong. And I think we're very honest. In our culture, you only pay for what you use. So why wouldn't you fly with me? Yes, now, of course, I am not the, Bargain Airline doesn't exist, okay? It's just a fiction of my imagination. The point here is this. There's certain ways in which we think. And when we see things that are out of the norm, or what we consider the norm, we immediately reject it because it doesn't seem right. But I'm not saying, I wouldn't fly Bargain Airlines either, okay? But there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Yeah. In principle, you know, I mean, like I did say, this is not reality. But in principle, just to get you thinking, I mean, the purpose of this, okay, please, again, George is not saying airlines should adopt this. But it's just to illustrate the fact that there are times we are so set in our ways, and we tend not to look laterally. Now, when we talk of safety, when we want to have a look at safe and unsafe areas, now, talk of safety, is this, when we have a look at the spectrum, do we have a situation where we have, you know, very, very safe, and then safety reduces gradually, and then it gets to a point where you become unsafe, slightly unsafe, but kind of okay, and then very, very unsafe? Is that the way you view safety? Okay. Right. So,
Systems are designed with a certain amount of redundancy and robustness.
yeah.
And I have when I teach, I have a view of a safety centered in a wider line. Operations are never always in that center circle. They go out and they come in, and they go out and they come in, and around a circle. So every once in a while, they may actually exit that unsafe line.
Very good. Yes.
Depending on the day and the week and who worked on the airplane yesterday.
Okay. So what you're saying, yes, thank you very much. And what you're saying is that we have an area where we'd all like to be there all the time, but that's not practical because of that, okay? So we call an area, a certain area where we say we have acceptable risks. In other words, it's not perfect, but we kind of accept it because of the situation we find ourselves. Now, is this area on the left or is it on the right? It's not a trick question, it's just to get you to think. Do we ever have a situation where we feel, well, it's not really safe, but hey, you know, it's acceptable? Do we ever have that? All the time. Can you give an example?
Showed the stairs before. You know, people might say, well, this is the way I've always done it, I've never fell.
Yeah.
everything's fine.
Yeah. A good example is in Texas.
All I was gonna say is that you define your own risk and you define what's acceptable to you. Whether you actually think through the consequences or not, you're still.
Beautiful, because there's a slide coming after that that would address that. One thing, I don't know how many Texans we have here, but one thing I cannot understand is how it is legal to ride a bike without a helmet. It's legal in Texas, and I thought, how could that be? It's surely not safe, but that's me, and that's because that's what I am used to. You understand? So can I impose my own system, my own beliefs, my own life on someone else? That's a good question to ask. And that's where ALAP comes into it. Where is it? Where does it sit? There, or does it keep moving up and down? Because all these things are very subjective. And that's why it's difficult when it comes to safety to if I may say, to put a definitive set of rules that this thou shalt. There's a way to do that, but we'll cover that later. Another way of looking at safety, which some systems operate, is either green or red, simple. There are no gradients, it's just purely safe or unsafe. So you have an action that is safe and continues to be safe until it crosses a line and becomes unsafe. What do you think about that? Think of that way of thinking. Does that make sense?
Well, there again, depends on the environment. A helicopter landing on a concrete pad is 150 feet wide with a big H in the center, as opposed to a scene landing in a highway, a two-lane highway with trees on both sides.
Yeah.
They do it all the time.
It depends on, yeah, absolutely. Because that brings us to this. Is that safe or unsafe? Well, you know what I mean. that is a school, well, I don't know what to call it, a school minibus or whatever. But would you consider that safe or unsafe? Did he say somewhere? Well, to these guys, it is safe. Because that is the best they can afford. They have they've considered a number of things. But that's the best we can do. So we have to accept that level of safety. Correct. And that's where this thing called cultural competence comes into it. Now, we'll be talking about this in about 10, 15 minutes, about cultural competence, more about, look, when you have a system in an organization, especially an organization that has branches around the world, no one's trying to say you reduce your safety levels, no. But what we are saying is you have to consider the local challenges that you're facing and make your system, adapt your system in some way that will still reflect the same culture of safety that you have as an organization. Now, there's something you're talking about, sir, and I'll use this to illustrate that as well. Any helicopter pilots here? Oh, helicopter pilots? Hey, okay, I got one. Right, this gauge, it just tells you how fast the blade goes around. That's it, simple, right? And the green area, remember, it's an area. It's not a green line. It's not a green mark. It's an area. And like you did say, sir, right, it's safe to be anywhere along the green, right? This is where, I don't think you can see it very well at the back because of the colors, but the yellow is where you have the acceptable risks. Okay, on this occasion I'll accept it, but do not make a habit of it. Okay? And then finally you have the unsafe, red line, absolutely not. That generally is what we're looking for in a safety culture. In that, because we are human beings, right? We're not machines where you can turn off and on. We are human beings, and everyone's different, and everyone takes things up differently. So you have to give a margin of conformance to what you want people to do. Now, one big question is, talking of money, would you say these thresholds should be or shouldn't be affected by money? should or shouldn't? Oh, and why not? Okay, we're talking about lives, but in reality, are these thresholds, and I'm not talking about a helicopter now, I just use that as an illustration, right? So, but in yeah. 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 In reality, thank you very much. And in reality, that's where ALARP comes in, right? In reality, it is affected. And the sad thing is, there ain't nothing we can do about it. What we can do is to ensure that our safety systems still reflect the essence of what we're trying to do. Because the reality is, if you put in all your money into safety and nothing into revenue, what happens to the company? And then safety is solved, right? So just to demonstrate that, organizations, the bottom line is organizations are set up to make money, and that's it. You know, Coke, you know, those that make tables, chairs, doesn't matter what it is. The bottom line is you want to make money. Now, there are two things, especially in this environment, where you need to ensure, keep going to continue to make money. And one is revenue and the other is safety. What would you say is more important, revenue or safety? What does that mean? Balance. And why? But I thought safety was the most important thing.
No, as you pointed out, if you bought a bunch of airplanes, I'm from the airline world, bought a bunch of airplanes, well, the safety department says in the first paragraph of the safety manual that in order to have a completely safe operation, we will never move the airplanes.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So you have to have a balance, and that's where you put the term acceptable level of safety.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the way I describe it is just to think of it like this. You have revenue and safety holding up the company. Now, if you're the kind of a person who goes, no, we have to be absolutely safe. Pilots are like that. You know, pilots love all the bells and whistles. You know, you want everything to be spick and span. But excuse me, you work in a company that's set up to make money. And if they don't make money, guess what? You're out of the job. So, and the whole company goes bust. So if all you think about is revenue and you say, yeah, not interested, I just want everything to be safe, that's what happens to the organization. It falls over. So there is a limit. You know, I like what you did. Can I copy that, please? That there is a limit to the way things go when we talk about money. Now, there's also something that's come into the world today, and that's automation, as you all know. It's not just automation as in terms of the autopilot, but it's the way we live our lives. These days, as you know, automation is everywhere. Banking system, aircraft, everywhere. At home, it's everywhere. Now, what is the main purpose of automation? What would you say? Do you think so? Okay. Anyone else? He says to reduce the amount of stuff we have to do and to think about. Right? Okay. 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 So if that's the case, what has the effect of automation been on our lives today? And I'll use the example of an airline cockpit. In the past, in the 1960s, you'd have a pilot and a co-pilot. You have a navigator. Navigator basically is the guy who has all the maps and tells the pilot where to go. The flight engineer basically looks after the aircraft. Okay? So the pilots, the sole job they had was to fly the aircraft. Okay? Then, in 2018, as we have today, Mr. Navigator doesn't exist anymore. He's now become a machine. It's called a flight management system, right? Punch and punch and punch. And the aircraft does exactly what the navigator used to do. Doesn't get a salary, doesn't need a pension. doesn't fall sick, doesn't have moods. All I have to do is just pay it once, buy it, and that's it. What happened to Mr. Flight Engineer? It's also gone forward. It's now the flight systems of the aircraft. Now, you did say a few minutes ago that it reduces the stuff that we have to think about. In the past, you had the pilots thinking solely about flying. Who manages this now? Who does the job of the navigator? The pilots. And who does the job of the flight engineer? The pilots as well. So automation, actually, what it does in all our lives is cramp more into the little space that we have. Your mobile phones, you can do emails and make calls and do this and play games. It has cramped so much into that little space. It hasn't actually reduced the amount of responsibilities you have. It has vastly increased it. And that's one of the things you tell pilots, that, look, don't think automation is going to do it for you. It flies the aircraft perfectly, but you still have to think, still do the thinking for the aircraft. So in the past, you had 4 people in the cockpit. Now you have just 2, or I go in 2 plus X. Now, because the people responsible for making and maintaining those things are kind of related somehow to the crew, but basically you have 2 people now doing the job of 4 people in the past. Now, like all organizations we talked about earlier on, bottom line is always money. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that is why the company was set up in the first place, right? Now, CEOs have gone, well, we've gotten rid of the flight engineer, we've gotten rid of the navigator. Do we really need 2 pilots? Why can't we just get rid of 1 pilot, so we just pay 1 salary? What do you guys have to say about that? Are you aware that's going on right now, by the way? Because I see a few surprised-looking faces. Yes, there's the talk, and serious talk, that some operators are talking to aircraft manufacturers to design single-pilot airliners. What do you have to say again?
Why do you need pilots at all?
Hey, now that's the next step. Why do you need pilots at all? Do we have the technology today to fly without pilots? We do. Drones. You can sit here and fly an aircraft in wherever, any part of the world. So why do we need pilots? Now, again, it always brings us back to the bottom line. This is where the human factor side of things comes in. Yes, I can decide as the CEO of Bargain Airlines, that I'm going to work with Boeing and to design this pilotless aircraft. Would you fly with me? I don't think people are ready for that today. So that's where that kind of control has come into the system. A few weeks ago, there was a session at the World Economic Forum, and this is what they said. Nearly 60 million extra jobs will be created by 2022. That's what, 4 years' time. Now, the first thing we tend to think about is, hey, the machines are taking over the jobs. What are people going to do? But these guys say, actually, the job requirements are going to increase. What they say is that 75 million jobs will be displaced, yes, but 133 million new jobs will be created. That's a net gain of what, 58 million jobs because of automation. Now, I have not been able to read much about it yet, as deeply as I'd like, to understand how those figures came about. But what I can see is, think about this. 50 years ago, did you have anything called, did you have anyone developing apps? Or people who made mobile phones? Or people who designed mobile phones? Those professions, those jobs didn't exist. So that is the way things are going. And when we talk of safety culture, or safety as a whole, we have to think of the way the world is going and make sure that we keep abreast with it. Otherwise, we get left behind and we become ineffective. So, checkpoint, we want to concentrate on principles and not instructions. Whenever we set up our systems, we want to think more of that. We also have to be prepared for a paradigm shift. What that means, basically, as you know, is think laterally. We want to look at the Yes, as we had over there, we want to do that, okay? And we want to have a look at what effect automation or modernization, etc., would have on the workplace, the way things are done at our workplace. Yeah, the CFT Summit, this summit, that's what the title says. Does it start at the top or at the bottom? If you look at a typical company, you've got the CEO, you've got the managers, and then you have the employees. Starting at the top means the CEO decides what to do, and you look at the other way. Now, what we are saying here with those points is that it is not, because safety, a safety culture is not a thing. It is not what we do, it is who we are. So if I ask you to describe what a safety culture is, and you find it difficult to describe, then I think, yeah, he kind of gets it. Because if I say, what does it feel like to have a headache? You know, you really cannot describe it because it's something there. You say, well, I have a pain. So, yeah, but what does that feel like? Can you describe pain? Yeah, it's something I don't really, it's not nice. You know, there's no way of describing it. You've got to live it to understand it. So safety, a safety culture, I should say, starts from within. It goes in all directions. And it's not something that basically goes per se. It is something that you are. And you've got to take ownership of it. Basically, that's what it is. I have mentioned this word culture. We're going to look more in the safety culture way, but let's just look at the word culture. I came across a definition a few weeks ago, and I thought this was absolutely spot on. I'll give you a few moments to read through. The operative parts are, it's a way of life that is accepted and is passed on from one generation to another. It's a way of life. It's not something you do, it is something you are. That's one, the big thing. It is accepted and is passed on. When I come to, at the end, when I come to my own, the case study, you'll understand why this is absolutely important. And then also, it's passed along by communication and imitation. People would follow and would believe more in what you do rather than what the book says, rather than what you have published. So a culture, safety, whatever it is passed on. It's a way of life, is accepted by the people you're trying to pass to, and is passed on from generation to generation by the way you behave. How? The first thing is it takes time, right? But where are you guys from? Italy? Now, I don't understand Italian. And there's no way I can understand Italian in 5 minutes. Impossible. Because I'm a human being, right? So for me to pick up the Italian culture, you know, the language and the culture, mannerism and all that, it's going to take time. So how on earth do you think you can write out a set of rules and expect people to start doing it the next day? It doesn't work. Safety culture takes time. Think of it more as that than as that. There's a study carried out about culture by some psychologists in Europe. And basically said the time it takes for people to reach 95% of their asymptote of automaticity ranges from 18 to 54 days. In English, what that means, okay, is that it takes a long time to develop a habit. It takes a long time. There's no quick fix. If you want to develop a safety culture and think you can do it in, you know, as you do with technical training, it doesn't work. Now, there are two approaches to managing, or do I say developing safety cultures. The first is problem solving, which is what we all do. You know, second is appreciative inquiry. Now, problem solving is we look for where the problems are. We look for the bad eggs. We look for the bad situations and then fix them, right? That's the way we're all trained. So you look, imagine a system that has good stuff, and then you've got some bad stuff in the system. What you want to do with problem solving is to reduce the bad, right? Does anyone know what appreciative inquiry talks about? Have you heard the term before? What it does is concentrate on the good and emphasize the good. So if somebody, for example, if I want to change the culture in a company where people, don't use the checklist much, right? Rather than going to those who don't and trying to deal with them, I'll go to those who do and use the skills that they have to pass it down the line. That's what appreciative inquiry is about. Now, which of the two systems you use depends on the situation you find yourselves. There's also something I'd like to share. And it is easier, as we all know, when it comes to training, to train someone correctly from the start, rather than trying to change the bad stuff that has come into the system, right? We all accept that. So imagine that's your company, and you've got the three tools to use. Problem solving tends to want to look at the red dots and reduce them. Appreciative inquiry would want to increase the green. Both are very good systems. Both are very effective. But there's a big issue. Now you've made your company really nice. You know, there's no little or no bad eggs, and we all have a fantastic safety culture. We're all doing very well. But there comes a point in time, ladies and gents, when those guys are going to retire. And you have to replace them with new workers. The HR department is responsible for that. Now, what you want to achieve is that, right? To bring all greens into the system. But how many organizations have you come across? I have never myself in the work I do, but how many organizations have you come across where the HR department works very closely with the professionals? Say with pilots, right? What the HR department tends to do is, well, we've got all these key markers, or if it doesn't have so many hours and blah, 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 and all that, if he satisfies those requirements, we hire. Do you think that works? Why not?
Depends on it. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay.
It's not an exact science.
Okay. I'll give you an example. I was consulting with a particular company once, and they had a rapid expansion, right? And they needed lots of pilots, so they're just hiring left, right, and center. And the HR department was left to do the vetting. Now, no one in the operations department had any input whatsoever to the hiring process. Then there was a guy who had been hired as an experienced commander, a captain, and his credentials, his resume didn't match up with what he was doing on the line. You know, his resume was so good, but he obviously really didn't know what he was doing. And I picked up his CV, right, and I looked at it. And the first thing I noticed that, no, that's impossible. Because this was when the AW139, an aircraft type, had just come out, had just been released to service. And I'd say this company was one of the launch customers. He said he'd flown in the Middle East, and he had 3 years of command experience. How can you have 3 years of command experience in an aircraft that doesn't exist? Now, I was able straight away to say, no, that's fake. Now, the HR department went with what they saw, and the guy was hired. Eventually, he was fired at the end of the day. Now, that was just a complete waste of money. So when we want to replace those who have left with more green dots, one of the most important things to maintain that safety culture is make sure that we vet those who are coming in by people who actually understand what the business is about. Going through change management, We all know what the change management process is. You know, you identify the needs, you communicate, you get staff buy-in. You understand what buy-in means? You know, when you get the staff to want to agree to what you're saying, you know, to how else can we put it? To accept the new rules, right? You implement what the process is, and then you assess the effects and go around again. Which of those would you say is the most difficult to achieve? Well, if I communicate, yes, I can come up with a new rule and send out emails and everything, and everybody reads it. So I've sent out the message. But which would you think is the most challenging of the 5? Staff buying. Because it's easy to write, to identify. It's easy to prepare rules and send emails or whatever. But it's difficult to get people to want to do what you're talking about. That's where the job is. And how do we address that using human factors? So, hey, guess what? Right, I am the safety manager of my company, and I want to enhance our safety culture. And I go, yeah, the 5 steps, blah, 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 staff buy-in, human factors, and most importantly, motivation and morale. Or some people call motivation now engagement. Same thing, right? So I need to make sure that people want to do what I'm telling them to do. Is that important, really? Why? Why can't I just tell them what to do? If you don't do that, you're fired. Why can't I do that?
Because you'll have to hire somebody else and flip a coin, whether it was good or bad, what you just fired.
Exactly. Motivation. You just talked about motivation, right? What exactly does it mean, motivation? What does the word motivation mean? Since you guys think it's important, what do you think it means? An individual's willingness to engage. So it's about my will, right? Okay. Okay, so I have a willingness, and I really believe, and I really want to get pregnant. Can I get pregnant? And why do you say that? Why can't I get pregnant? Because I don't have the ability to get pregnant. So motivation is not just the wanting to, it's also the able to, right? If you want to motivate people, remember, motivation is not just the desire or energy, it's the ability to. I cannot motivate, if I want to motivate people, if I want to motivate, say you guys are all people in my department, and I have a requirement for someone to go to Italy to carry out some kind of job. I'll go for you guys. Why? It's obvious, right? Because I'll go for people who are most comfortable with it, unless you're running away from the country for something. But for people who are, no, I'm just teasing. For people who are most comfortable with it, for people who have the best ability to, right? And then they would tend to fit in very nicely. I remember I was line training somebody. When people come out of school and they come into the on the line, it was a young boy, and he just finished flying school. But I could tell he was a computer whiz kid. And the first few days on the line, you kind of want to just slowly introduce them to what they do as they fly. Now, because I knew he was a computer thinking person, I put him to work on the flight management system, which is all computers, to get him comfortable in the environment, and then slowly started to introduce the others. If, on the other hand, I was training somebody who was someone with gray hair like that, okay? I wouldn't tend to do that. I would probably make him fly more and then slowly introduce him to the flight management system. So why am I doing that? I've identified what abilities these guys have. And that is what you use to motivate. Both of them would eventually get there, but the journey would be a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable. Is it important to make it enjoyable? It's just the thought that went through my mind. Do you think it's important to make this journey enjoyable? Yeah. You may think that that's a very silly question, but I was running a training course somewhere in the UK this many years ago, and we're talking about motivation, and someone came up and says, "Oh, George, that's all rubbish. I don't believe in all that. I get paid a salary, and I don't expect anything more from the company than for me to do my job. I get paid a salary, I do my job, and I don't see any reason why the company should be nice to me or me to be nice to the company." I almost fell out of my boots. I mean, what would you guys say to that guy? What would you say to him? Well, I had to manage that situation. I managed to convince him. So how do we motivate? This is what human beings look like. We are complicated, difficult to manage machines, right? The systems we have to operate themselves are very complicated. What you want to do is to reduce, you cannot eliminate, but reduce the amount of complication, right? Whatever rules you want to bring forward, you want to make them as easily understandable as possible. Not to convince yourself that you've written something really technical. What you want to do is, look, it's not about me, it's about them. What do they understand? What do they want? How can I make what I need them to do merge with what they want? If I'm able to achieve that, then I can stand back and watch the system work. Okay? Another point here is, which of these cars would you say is better? This or that? I can see you thinking laterally. I'm doing a good job here, I think. Right, so which car is better? Exactly. Exactly. And hey guys, that's all what this session is about. To get you to start thinking. For a family of 5, that's absolutely useless. Well, you can take each one on a trip backwards and forwards wherever you're going, but that's not very useful. But if you've just got a new girlfriend, that's what you want. So it all depends. It all depends on what you need for the system. Talking of rules, 10.5 miles an hour. Well, I've never driven a car that has half-mile notches. Oh, why would that be? Why not 10? Why not 15? Why 10.5? Because what does that, when you see a sign that doesn't make sense or you think is really stupid, what do you tend to do? What's your attitude towards the sign? Say again? Ignore it. So if I bring up a new safety set of rules and I expect people to follow the rules and they're not relevant and they don't make sense, people would ignore it. Look at this one. You just passed it. And what if my weight is 65,000 pounds? Do I drive at 37 or 26? So whatever rules you want to bring up, they've got to make sense. And I like what you just said. That's perfect. You don't want to present, people are driving past, right? So they don't have much time to read. So you have to present the information in a way that is relevant to them. Remember we said that a few seconds ago? It has to make sense to them. It is for them, not for me, the regulator, or whatever you want to call me. So how do we motivate? Well, first of all, we have to realize that policies and procedures must be reasonable and relevant to the needs of the individuals. It has to be relevant to them, and it has to be reasonable as well. I'm not sure where you're all from, but does any one of you work with an organization that has international branches around the world? Right. Okay. So I just said international branches around the world. Duh. So you have a set of rules, okay, brought up by like regulatory authority, like if you're in the aviation, like the FAA or CAA or whatever, EASA. And the rules are passed down to your organization, your head office, where you have this new set of rules. Now you have to create rules, create procedures to pass these rules to different parts of the world. For local procedures, how would you go about doing it? There are two options here. Would you go for homogeneous procedures? In other words, I would create a checklist or a set of procedures at the headquarters and issue it around the world. Or would I start with the certain goals we want to achieve, right? And send the information of the goal to the different parts of the world and get them to come up with their own procedures that follow the goals. In other words, would I have one book for the company worldwide, or would I have one set of guidelines and several books for the other, for the different countries? What would you say is the better way? Guidelines. Why would you say so? Yeah. 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 You're absolutely right there. I am aware of two major companies, but they opted for one set of rules for the whole world. Why do you think they did that? Okay, I'll give you an example. I have an example here. In my early flying days, I was flying in Nigeria then, and we had this, the company decided, yes, we want to standardize our procedures around the world, because we were all over the whole world, from Australia to UK to everywhere, Trinidad, everywhere. And there was a standardization training captain who went around, came from headquarters, and this is what we're going to do. So I was flying with him. We just taken off. Now, Nigeria is temperature. Yes, I like that look. The temperature in Nigeria is, you know what it is. And so I took off, and so I have to take off checks, right. Altimeters, set and cross-check, bugs set, anti-icing. I skipped it and went on to the next one, radar. And he said, stop, stop, stop. That is not the company standard. I went, sorry, what are you talking about? He says, you missed the anti-icing checks. You missed the checks. I said, temperature is plus 32, or that's about late 90s, 90s in Fahrenheit. There's no way we're going to have ice here. He says, no, that's the company standard, and you will do the checks just as everyone does it around the world. I said, okay, right. After takeoff checks, altimeters, blah, 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 bugs set, anti-icing, temperature is plus 32 degrees Celsius, pretty warm, and now icing checks, you look around the screen, frames and wipers and everything. So I did that, and oh yes, and no signs of ice. And he says, well done. What effect did you think it had on me? Really, what effect do you think it had on me? It went on the ground. Immediately went down. One, it went down. Two, I started to revolt mentally. I went to the passive-aggressive. I mean, I didn't shout at him or anything. He was a big boy. But I went to the passive-aggressive, I mean, why are you telling me to do the icing checks? He said, oh, yeah, because if you do happen to fly at other bases of the company where you have icing, then you'd know what to do. I went, it doesn't take me 10 seconds to learn how to do the checks. Come on. Why am I wasting my time? Anyway, company standard. So, yeah, anti-icing, plus 32, no signs of ice. So we want the checks to be relevant because one of the things, like I said, in my case, He lost me. He lost me there totally. And it was just not just me. That was what happened. That was the effect it had in other parts of the company where temperatures were pretty warm. Having said that, should we encourage the letter of the law, of the regulations, or the spirit? Does everyone understand what that question means? Do we encourage the letter, or do we encourage the spirit? Or both? And how does that work?
Make sure that your letter contains the spirit. That will be clear to everyone.
Yep. Make sure your letter maintains the spirit. Oh, I love that. Another copyright, please. Right. Make sure the letter maintains the spirit. Yes. You cannot break the letter, yeah. But what you're more interested in is my background is flying. Doing things sensibly. Yes. You may want to, you always want to obey the law, but there are times you have to break the law to maintain safety. I'm sure we all agree with that. Safety systems could be seen either as passive or active. In other words, like a seatbelt. You know, it doesn't work until it's called upon. So it's just there, right? It's like on standby. Or active, that's something that is always on to prevent an accident. It's the same thing with human behavior, or when we talk of human factors. You could either have enforced compliance with a rule or willful conformance. Does anyone have an idea of what the difference is? Fantastic, fantastic. I think it was, 3 years ago or 4 years ago, one of my sessions was on that. You know, the word compliance. I think it was titled Compliance Big Deal or something. Compliance is, I am telling you to do it and you will do it, otherwise you're fired. But hey, now for me to maintain your doing it, I have to sit at your neck all the time, right? I have to make sure I police you all the time to make sure you do it all the time. And the moment I turn away, you do your own thing. But why don't I get you to want to do it? If you want to do it, you would almost always do a good job. And I don't have to police you because it's part of you. It's your culture. And that's what we're trying to get with safety culture. It's not about what I do, it is who I am. And that's the summary of the whole thing. A good safety culture, it's not about this is what it is. It is who the person is. Now, how do we get there? I've talked about it already. It's all about knowing how the human mind works, how behavior works. And you want to manipulate sounds like a bad word, but you want to adjust things to get them to want to do it and to continue to maintain to do it. And this is a practical example. How would you deal with this situation? How would you stop people from crossing the grass area? So exactly. Now that makes sense. Now you notice that he didn't say put up a sign that says avoid the grass area, because it ain't going to work. Why won't it work? I guess you answered that, right? Because people would always tend to do what is most convenient for them. Okay, if that's the case, then why don't I set the system to replicate what they would normally want to do? And as long as if I can achieve that, then that's perfect, because they are doing what I want them to do. They are legal, but then it's something they want to do anyway. But there are times you cannot achieve that. There are times you cannot turn that into grass. I've never heard that. That's a new one for me. Turn that into grass and pave that. But I can do something with that sign. What if I put up that sign? It says, beware of snakes. How many people will be bold enough to cross? Yeah. Now, with this, what I've done is that I have taken, now listen to this very carefully, I have taken the responsibility of the decision away from me to you. You having the right to take that decision, because I know what decision you're going to take. You're not going to want to work, to walk next to snakes, or you're going to, be very careful. But you have taken the decision because that is what you want, and you will follow the rules. And I don't have to police you, unless you're an Australian, as you said. So that's what we want to achieve. I mean, having a look at that, this was in someone's house. I just saw this. I laughed at that. The person says, oh, well, I want people to come from here and walk along there to go, and then from there. Guess what? And that happened. So before you do things like that, same thing in systems, you have to find out what is important for them, what works for them. How can I then make what works for them merge with what they have to do? Any questions there? That's not from me. Any questions? Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. No. Because in different parts of the world where you actually get icing, they actually have to go through the process, checking for signs of ice and check that the ice detector is on, check, make sure, there's a whole lot of things. But what the company wanted was to have everyone within the company, do exactly the same wherever you are. So saying that itself wasn't good enough for them at that point in time. Okay. Any other questions? Yes. Okay. Yes, thanks a lot for that. Now, that was the thinking of the company then. But when you come down to reality, if it's all about training and getting people used to things, a checklist, when you pick up a checklist, all you're doing is reading and carrying out the actions. I can pick up the checklist of any aircraft today I've never been in. As long as I know where the buttons are, okay, fine. If I've never been in, it might be very difficult to know what to do where the buttons are. But if I do know where the buttons are, and it doesn't matter what language is written in or what system is written, what color it is, all I do is, it says, pick up the book. Where is the book? If that's the book, I pick it up. Move the chair, and I move the chair. You understand? Now, the downside of that, now this session is more about human factors, but then when it comes to the training side of things, you are instilling, like what we talked about earlier, a wrong type of inappropriate training. Reality is that it doesn't take 2 seconds to teach someone how to do the icing checks. Now, the big downside with that, not with that company, with another company, who adopted that same style, was the checklist that was written that was okay in a particular part of the world was completely unusable. Not just like icing in this case, but it couldn't work in another part of the world because of the way things were set up. If you followed the checklist, it just couldn't fly. So people never followed the checklist. That in itself brought in a lot more danger than that. Now, there's no system that's 100% correct. But what you have just pointed out is easily dealt with, very easily dealt with in the training environment because people just read it. Okay. So just to quickly go over that, safety is a culture, it's not an event. We've talked about that. It is not a priority. It is what we are made up of. It has to be innate. It has to be an innate attribute. We also talked about the fact that culture is always dynamic. We cannot say we've got safety culture sorted out today and think we can remain with the same system forever. It doesn't work. Also remember that it takes time. Policies should be relevant. And I guess that also addresses your point, sir. It has to be relevant. It has to be relevant to them for several reasons, which we really cannot go too deeply into right now. Okay. Oh, sorry. Right. So group discussions. What I want us to do is just take about 5 minutes to do this. I met with an old friend of mine about a couple of months ago in the UK, a childhood friend of mine. He's a structural engineer. And we're just talking about the way the world is going and the way some professions are dying off, and the way things are generally. And he made this statement. Why should I hire expensive guys when I can hire the cheaper guys who can do the job but then have access to the experience? Do you understand that? Basically, why do I have to hire someone who has 20 years experience when I can hire someone who can actually do the job with 5 years experience, pay him a lot less? And if he does come to a problem where he needs experience, the benefit of experience, he can give the other guy a call. So I'd like you, sir, would you like to join him at this table to discuss that? I'd like you to just have a short discussion, 5 minutes. First of all, do you agree with what he said? Do you agree with that reasoning? And if you do, is it something you'd like to adopt in your organization? So, just a few minutes. Do you agree with that? And if you do, what would you do? Sorry. Yeah, thanks. I need a break. It's pretty warm here.
I can't believe I got nervous. I mean, I've done this. I have colonels and generals and everything.
It happens. Yeah, it happens. Yeah.
I haven't done it in a long time, but I'm like, oh well. Still fun. But I'll answer your question.
Yeah.
If you're the guy with 5 years experience, he will agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're the guy running the company, I don't think he would, because there's, like even in the records department where I'm at, experienced people will see the subtle things that can take you out of compliance that a guy with very little experience will miss.
Yeah. Yep. These things are just. Okay, ladies and gents, I'm sorry to, because I see you're having a lot of fun. I'm sorry to butt in. Does anyone disagree with that? Yes. I deliberately asked the question that way. I wanted to get you to think. Okay, you disagree with that. Why?
There's a lot of reasons. First of all, the time that the guy, the inexperienced guy, would waste in looking at the database. If actually there's a database for that problem, actually that problem should be there in the first place because they should have adapted the, let's say, the company in a way that that problem is already dealt with in, I don't know, in project phase. Also, the solution could be just for that issue and not take into account other things that were probably an experienced person would know that that solution would work only on that but not on the rest, and so you would just waste time. I don't know, there's a lot of reasons why.
There's a lot of reasons why. Anyone else, just very, very quickly?
I just look at it, and my thought is, that I use the maintenance mechanic example. You get the maintenance mechanic, you get an apprentice comes in, and yes, the apprentice comes in lower, but they're gonna learn, and at some point in time, they're gonna wanna move up. And then if they're not gonna move up in the company, they're gonna go somewhere else. Then here comes another apprentice. How long is this mechanic gonna wanna keep trading?
Right. Okay. Now, I thought that was really, really good. Really good question. Because guess what? The reality of the business world today, especially in the, well, I talk about the helicopter world, that's where I am from. The reality is what the big companies do today is exactly that. There has been, with the big three, there was about a year ago or so, 2 years ago, there was a mass layoff because of the downturn in the industry. And what they did was, you start from the lowest ranking captain. Well, the captain, so he can fly, okay? He can fly in command. And they counted up to the number of pilots they needed, and those who were above were let go because they were the expensive ones. Now, you can complain as much as what you want, but that is the reality of today. I know what I believe, I guess because I'm on the side of the experience side and I want to continue to remain relevant, but that's the reality. So how do we manage that reality? Because everything is down to money, really, because that's the way the business is today. It's just a thought for you to have. I'm not saying one way or the other, okay? But what I am saying is it is something that you have to consider when you want to come up with a new or an improved way of doing things. Right, in conclusion, safety is an innate culture. We've talked about that over and over again. It is within, it's something that we have to develop within. And from the theme of the summit, we build safety from all parts of the company. It's not something that goes linearly up or down. It's something that goes in every direction. Why? Because it starts from every direction. It belongs to everybody. Remember also, we talked about the principles are the ones, we start from principles, and from principles, we then develop instructions. We don't just think of instructions. We don't just think of wanting the leaves to look green. We have to realize that the leaves are green because of very good soil and very good roots. And it's the same thing with policies as well. The policies have to be relevant, they have to make sense, etc., etc. And then you would have very good rules. And then people would behave well in the company. This takes us to what you call technical and non-technical solutions. If we go back to, just very quickly, if we go back to the how to develop safety cultures. We talked about the staff buy-in, which is the human side of things. And we talked about human factors being, or human behavior, motivation and morale, being the foundation of what we have to look after. With a well-motivated workforce who are appropriately trained, with icing checks. Okay? That was for your benefit. Appropriately trained, then we end up getting a very good safety culture. But it takes time. You just always remember that. It's not a quick fix. Remember, what we want is who I am. We want willful conformance. We want to get people to want to do the right thing. And when they do that, we have to police them less. We spend less money on correcting things, on checking things, because they naturally would do the right thing. And I'll just wrap up with my personal example, the case study. And this is about the difference between a company that spent more time on enforced compliance, as in you will do it, and everyone did it, but they didn't really believe in it. We were tasked to fly some company managers of the clients, the big boys, fly them offshore for a shutdown offshore. They're going to have a meeting or something. So we went out in the morning, we shut down, the guys got out, and now with the helicopters, the blades are pretty flexible, they flap quite a bit when not turning. And because there was going to be heavy weather going through, strong winds, you have to tie down the blades to either to the deck or to the frame of the aircraft. And of course, because the blades are pretty high, we always had ladders, step ladders. So I brought out the step ladders, I went and I set it up, and I went with the hook to climb the step ladder to hook the blade down, So I'd only gone about 2 or 3 steps. And this guy just came running out, brought out a red card. It's called a stop card. If you're not familiar with it, in the oil and gas environment, you have the stop card. Once someone gives you the red card, you have to stop what you're doing. So stop. I mean, what's wrong? He says, though, you don't have the proper PPE. You need company regulations. If you're going to go above, I think he said 3 steps or something, you need the harness, hand heart, this and that. I said, hey, I'm just going to tie this blade down. He says, no, those are the company principles, and you cannot do that. I said, okay, well, if that's the case, I can't leave the aircraft the way it is. So what I'm going to have to do is start up and go back to Aberdeen. And when your guys are ready, give us a call. I will come back for them, because we can't leave the aircraft here. I don't have the harnesses or anything. But the weather is going to get bad. So can you tell your guys, your bosses, your big boys, that there's a likelihood they'd have to spend the night offshore because the weather is going to go really bad and they may not be able to land when we come back? He paused for a few seconds and said, I am just going downstairs to the bathroom and I'll be back in 15 minutes. I said, yes, I understand what you're saying. And off he went. Now, if the guy really believed in safety, if he really, if it was his culture, would he have done that? Why did he do that? Why did he go to the bathroom when I was about to tie down the blades? If he really felt that there was real danger, he wouldn't have left. He would have really stopped me. So it's not enough, when the true test of safety culture in a system, like some people say, oh, it's the way you behave when no one's looking. Yeah, the true test is, do you really believe in this? If you don't, then you're actually wasting your time. You're wasting resources and you're wasting your time. How do we achieve that? Well, I did say I'm not going to talk about 7 ways to strip this or 5 ways to sniff flowers, but I think it's a good thing just to run through some points in concluding. To create a safety culture, we want to think more of the principles rather than the instructions. Be prepared for a paradigm shift. We want to properly manage that money issue. Right? You cannot say, well, it's all safety, or you cannot say, oh, it's all money. There has to be a balance, right? understand the workplace dynamics and how it changes, because it always changes. You want to train correctly from the onset, okay? Realize that culture change takes time. That's always the difficult part for the CEOs, because they want instant answers. But there's certain things that I dare you to prepare your Thanksgiving turkey in 5 minutes. It don't work. It has to take time. It has to take its time. You want to make effective use of appreciative inquiry. Remember, it's about looking for what's good and celebrating it, trying to spread it around the company, rather than just concentrating on the bad stuff and trying to get rid of it. And finally, procedures must be reasonable and they must be relevant. They must be relevant to what the guy is doing for several reasons. And that is it. Any questions whatsoever? Apart from the icing checks? Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate it. And you've got my details there. If you'd like to ask any questions or send me an email, throw me an email. And it's always good to discuss these things. I mean, my desire, my goal is to see people think more in terms, or to consider more in terms of how the human mind works, the behavior, rather than just trying to be very dogmatic in what they do with the rules. Thank you very much.